Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So it's springtime and I thought I'd do some spring cleaning on my personal Commander collection. I've now had time to take in and evaluate the new cards from Strixhaven as well as the ones from the Commander Precon decks. So with that, I thought it'd be fun to talk about what cards I'm considering for my personal Commander decks. And if you've got one of these decks as well, you might want to consider these cards too. I'll be sure to have a link to the cards that I'm considering in the description below. And actually, in this image and throughout the episode, you might be noticing that some of my commanders have some altered artwork on them. A big thank you to Alter Sleeves for sending over some fantastic Alter Sleeves for me to try out. If you're looking for some Alter Sleeves and an easy way to support this channel, you can use my affiliate link in the description below or use the coupon Commander's Quarters at checkout. But with all that said, let's jump into it. So first up, let's jump into things and talk about the cards that I'm considering for Golos Tireless Pilgrim. Up to this point, I've done quite a few episodes on Golos, and actually it was the commander that I used on Close Quarters. My most recent episode on Golos, though, was this one where I talked about my 166 card deck. Essentially, I've got a 60 card shell that I start off with, and then I've got 40 cards that I randomly add into the deck. So I've got a separate pile of cards, I shuffle those up, and I take 40, and then that's added to my deck. I don't know what those cards are, so it makes Golos activations pretty random and pretty fun. Again, when you activate Golos, you get to cast 3 cards off the top of your library for free. So the first card that I'm considering adding into Golos in that giant pile of cards is Triplicate Titan. It's a 9/9 golem for 9 that has Flying, Vigilance, and Trample. And when it dies, you get a 3/3 with Flying, a 3/3 with Vigilance, and a 3/3 with Trample. So essentially this is a bigger version of Wormcoil Engine, but with different keywords. Yeah, that's a fun thing to hit off the top. That is a massive threat when it's in play, and when it dies, you still get a benefit. Now, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but for these cards that I am considering, I am still working to keep them budget. And with the set and the Commander Precons being released recently, things are in a little bit of flux with prices. So essentially for my considerations, any version of these cards that are under $2, I am considering for this list. With that said, let's move on to my next card that I'm considering with Angel of the Ruins. Angel of the Ruins is a 5/7 artifact creature angel with flying that costs 5 white. It has Plane Cycling for 2, and when it enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target artifacts and/or enchantments. So this card has a decent amount of flexibility. If it's in our hand early and we need a planes, we can just get rid of it. And if we hit this off the top with Golos, we've got a fantastic ETB that can get rid of some of our opponent's things. It's around $1 right now, and I think it can be a great include in a more casual version of Golos like mine. Another fantastic include, I think, with a lot of potential is Selfless Glyphweaver / Deadly Vanity. The front of this MDFC has Exile it, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And the backside says choose a creature or planeswalker, then destroy all the creatures and planeswalkers. So the front side of this card can protect my entire team. And the backside can get rid of everything except Golos. And at just a quarter, this is a fantastic consideration for the deck, and it's probably going to get added in. Next up though, let's move on and talk about Culling Ritual. It's a sorcery for 2 black-green, and it says destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less, add black or green for each permanent destroyed this way. This is a deck with a ton of things that have a very high converted mana cost. So this isn't going to hit basically any of our things. And then when we do cast this, well, everything that's small goes away and we can get a lot of mana. And all that mana can help us activate Golos again or cast another spell, etc, etc. Now this one definitely is not a shoo-in, but it's definitely a consideration. Another consideration is going to be Surge to Victory. This is a sorcery for 4 red, and it says exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Creatures you control get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player this turn, copy the exiled card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This deck has a good amount of powerful creatures that can get through and dish out a lot of damage. It also has some really high converted mana cost spells that are really powerful as well. So this can pump our entire team to make them even more deadly, and then when they get some damage through, we get some more spells, and yeah, that's probably game over. Currently this card is less than $1, so it's one that I'm definitely considering. Next up though, let's move on to General Tazri, which actually is a deck that I really haven't done a proper episode on. Okay, I guess technically I did an episode a little while back on the final piece to my dream deck where I talked about Maskwood Nexus and my Lord's deck. My Lord's deck I've wanted to build for quite some time, and to be completely honest, it's not done yet. I don't have a finalized version of it yet, so I'm not going to go through the entire deck, but basically, here's the gist. You want Maskwood Nexus in play, but a nice backup is to use General Tazri to go get Mere Entity and get that in play. Then you turn all of your creatures into all creature types, and fun is to be had. You have a bunch of different Lord effects that can be incredibly impactful. Again, when this deck is finalized, I promise I will be doing an episode on it. But at this point, it is still very much a work in progress, and I'm doing a lot of testing with it. Now, the one card that I might be considering from this set for this deck is Spawning Kraken. It's a 6/6 Kraken for 5 and a blue, and it says whenever a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 9/9 blue Kraken creature token. Now, typically this card would be limited to just Sea Monster tribal decks, but again with our Lord's deck, all of our things are Sea Monsters. In fact, all of our creatures are all creature types. Now, my version isn't exactly a combat-centric version, it's more about tapping and untapping, or at least I should say it is right now. Still, this can easily be a game-ending card in even that type of a deck. You get some creatures through, you make a ton of 9/9s, and then you can utilize those creatures for a lot of other things in a deck like that. Now, actually this came up with Triplicate Titan as well, but it appears that for whatever reason the extended art version is a lot cheaper than the regular version. So if someone knows why, please let me know in the comments below, but yeah, the regular version's around $10, but the extended art is only $1.40, so I'm considering it. Regardless, at this point, Spawning Kraken is the only card that I'm considering for that General Tazri deck. But with how that deck is changing and it's not finalized, there might be other considerations as well in the future. Next up though, let's move on to my 3-color Flying Hippo friend with Feldergriff. Now my Feldergriff deck tech I actually did quite a long time ago. I mean, this is over 2 years ago at this point. And actually this deck I ended up taking apart for Kenrith and then actually putting back together. I kinda have enough 5-color commanders as it is right now with Tazri as well as Golos. Regardless, my Feldergriff deck is a political control deck. I'm looking to protect myself and make deals with opponents by giving an opponent an absurd amount of hippos. They can utilize those hippos to take out the other players, and then as soon as it's just me and that other player, I take those hippos back and smack them in the face. I mean, if we're playing together, I definitely wouldn't do that to you though. Regardless, from this set in the pre-con decks, there's a decent amount of cards that I actually want to consider for Feldergriff. The first is Perplexing Test, which is a fantastic card for token decks. It's an instant for 3 blue that says choose one, return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, or return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands. Basically, this is a board wipe for either all token creatures or all non-token creatures. So we flood the board with hippo tokens, giving one of our opponents an absurd amount of hippos. Of course, we've made a deal with them that they can't attack us with those hippos, and then we just use this to clear the board for them so they can get a lot of damage through on another opponent. Or conversely, if we've already stolen the hippos back, we get rid of their creatures so we can get our hippos through. Now, obviously this does bounce Feldergriff or any of our other creatures, but it's going to be well worth it. At instant speed, this flexible board wipe can be really impactful in a deck like this. And at just 50 cents, this card is very budget. Next up, we've got Commander's Insight. It's an instant for X blue that says target player draws X cards plus initial card for each time they've cast a commander from the command zone this game. So essentially in some ways, this is an improved X draw spell. With this deck, we're looking to ramp, and ramp some more to get a lot of mana for our hippos, but we can also utilize that mana for an X spell like this. But next up, let's move on to Solve the Equation. It's a sorcery for a 2 and a blue, and it says search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So yeah, this is a tutor for whatever instant or sorcery we need. This can help us out in a lot of situations, again, especially towards the end of the game when we need to go grab a finisher. You know, the one that helps us steal our hippos back? Yeah, that one. And finally, another card that I'm considering for Feldergriff is Combat Calligrapher. It's a 3/3 flying that says Inklings can attack you or planeswalkers you control. Whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a tap 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying that's attacking that opponent. So this incentivizes our opponents to attack each other. And although there's technically a downside to this card once it's gone, because then those Inklings can attack us, we've got plenty of other ways to Pelfor it up and protect ourselves. So giving our opponents extra creature tokens and incentivizing them to attack each other is never a bad thing. But next up, let's move on to one of my 2-color decks with Rarity. Now, I'm sure I've mentioned Rarity in a couple of episodes, but if you want to see it in action, go ahead and check out the Quest for the Jank Lord, the Great Unbanning episode. And like the other commanders in that episode, Rarity is silver border, so technically it's not a legal commander or even a legal card in Commander. But every time I ask if I can play Rarity, I've never had anyone say no. And I do have a backup commander for the deck just in case. Regardless, Rarity is a 2/2 unicorn for 1 white blue. She has rare and mythic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And that actually is the only text that I pay attention to, and I ignore that activated ability, because I think that without that text it's a completely reasonable commander, which again is why many players are okay with playing against it. Regardless, for my Rarity deck, I put some self-imposed restrictions on it. I literally can only use budget, rare, and mythic cards. So the first card that I'm considering out of sheer desperation for a budget rare mana rock is Strixhaven Stadium. It's an artifact for 3 and it has tap, add colorless, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from it. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium, then if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all and that player loses the game. Now, an alternative target player loses the game condition is great, but in the Rarity deck, I'm not likely to actually ever get to that point. So hopefully if I end up adding this into the Rarity deck, I can convince my opponents that I am literally just using this as a mana rock. Yes, it might get some point counters on it throughout the game, but please don't smack me too hard trying to get them off. So we'll see how that goes. Another card that I am definitely considering though, and that Rarity is all about, is Dazzling Sphinx. It's a 4/5 flyer, and when it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards to the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, and that player puts the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of their library in a random order. Basically, hit someone and cast something completely random for free. Yeah, my Rarity deck is all about that kind of nonsense. And then we've got Replication Technique. It's a sorcery for 4 and a blue, and it has Demonstrate, create a token that's a copy target permanent you control. So my Rarity deck isn't going to be all that threatening, and it's willing to make a lot of deals. So letting someone else copy one of their things is going to be well worth it for me to copy 2 of mine. Well, letting them copy one of their things, and also maybe making a deal with me too. And then there's the fantastically designed multiple choice. It's a sorcery for X and a blue, and it says if X is 1, scry 1, then draw a card. If X is 2, you may choose a player, they return a creature they control to its owner's hand. If X is 3, create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. And if X is 4 or more, do all of the above. So this card can do a lot of things, and again, keep in mind that Rarity is reducing the cost by 1. So only having to pay 4 mana to scry 1, then draw a card 4 times, bounce a creature, and make a 4/4, yeah, that's a lot of value. And speaking of drawing, another one that I've already mentioned is Commander's Insight, which yes, Rarity can utilize as well. And another one that I've already mentioned as well is Combat Calligrapher that can be utilized in this deck too. One that I haven't mentioned yet though is Tempted by the Auric, and I am tempted to add this card in that deck. Okay, that was bad. Regardless, this card is a sorcery for 1 blue blue blue. It says for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls with mana value 3 or less. So we can take 3 small things that our opponents hopefully won't miss too much. And just 3 mana to steal 3 things is a lot of value. We can also utilize a card like Sly Instigator. It has pay a blue, tap, until your next turn, target creature an opponent controls can't be blocked, go with that creature. So we essentially force an opponent's creature to attack one of our opponents, and it's going to be getting through. So we keep the biggest creature off of us and onto someone else. And speaking of big creatures, let's talk about Geometric Nexus. It says whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of charge counters on Geometric Nexus equal that spell's mana value. By paying 6, remove those charge counters from it, and we create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, and we get X counters on it, where X is the number of charge counters moved this way. So thanks to our commander, we can get this out for just 1 mana. And then with it being in play for just a little while, we can get a lot of value out of it and make some really huge creatures. Is it kinda janky? Yeah, but Rarity is all about jank. And the final card that I'm considering for Rarity, and actually looking back, there were quite a few cards I'm considering for it, which is really exciting, is Guardian Archon. It's a 5/5 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, we secretly choose an opponent. By revealing the player that you chose, you and target permanent you control each gain protection from the chosen player until end of turn, activate only once. So this can be a lot of fun, making our opponents guess, well, which one we chose. And then when we need to reveal it, it can be a very powerful and impactful effect. Next up, let's move on to another one of my low power decks with Gerard Golgari Lichlord. Now my Gerard deck is actually a deck that was built on just $10 worth of budget. Or actually technically $9.99. So it's a low power deck, but it can pack a punch when it gets going. It's looking to get creatures in the graveyard and sacrifice big creatures and drain our opponents out for a ton. So of course, when I saw the 11/10 for 4 mana Dagmoth Titan, I knew it had a spot in this deck. That's right, an 11/10 for just 4 mana. Now, yes, if this attacks or blocks with a sacrifice a creature, but in this deck, well, sacrificing creatures isn't all that bad, number 1, and number 2, we don't really even need to use this for attacking or blocking. All we need to do is get this in play and pay 3 more mana with our commander and sacrifice it to drain all of our opponents for 11. That's 33 life lost in total for just 7 mana. Yeah, that's a big swing. And speaking of big creatures, let's talk about Paradox Zone. It's an enchantment for 4 and a green and enters the battlefield with a growth counter on it. At the beginning of our end step, we double the number of growth counters on it, and we create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. It's going to get X ++1 counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. Essentially, we keep getting bigger and bigger creatures. On the first turn, our growth counter doubles, so we get a 2/2, then we get a 4/4, then an 8/8, and you see where this is going. So this can easily get out of control really quickly, and of course we keep sacrificing them with our commander to drain our opponents out for a ton. And speaking of doubling counters, let's talk about Fractal Harness. When it enters the battlefield, we get a fractal with X counters on it, and we attach Fractal Harness to it. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, we double the number of ++1 counters on it. So we can make that fractal bigger and bigger, but of course there are plenty of creatures in this deck that already have counters on them, so we can double their counters as well. And doubling up the number of counters on something to then sacrifice it for a lot of life loss can be very impactful. But yet another fantastic potential addition to this deck is Infused with Vitality. It says until end of turn, target creature gains Death Touch, and when this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, you gain 2 life. Being able to sacrifice a creature and bring it back immediately can be a very impactful thing in this deck. Or we can just sacrifice a creature and get something else back with something like Rushed Rebirth. It says choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Keep in mind that this is a very flexible card because yes, we can choose an opponent's creature as well. But if we aren't looking to sacrifice one of our own, we can go get something with lesser mana value and get it right into play. And keep in mind that with this deck, lesser mana value doesn't mean less power. So we can get something with even more power into play and then sacrifice that and drain our opponents, and you see where this is going. But now let's move on to Nylia, and with it an amazing altar from Clover Alters. The very talented Madison who runs Clover Alters is one of these spike feeders. And when a version of my Nylia deck was shown off on their channel, she was far too generous and made an altar Nylia for me. So make sure you check out her other amazing altars on Instagram, and I'll be sure to include a link in the description below. Regardless, my Nylia deck is definitely one that I've talked about in quite a few episodes. Most notably, it was the deck that I was talking about in the episode, the one deck I won't play anymore. Basically, the gist is this. Even on the $25 budget that I made this commander deck on, it is still too powerful for the vast majority of groups. It is an artifact storm deck that is essentially looking to play solitaire. But if others are playing very powerful decks as well, and they are up for me playing this deck, then I am more than happy to play it. So I still have it in my collection just in case that situation comes up. Now when it comes to the cards in this set that I'm going to be considering, there actually really only is one. Unfortunately, we didn't get any cheap cantripping artifacts, but we did get Frostboil Snarl. As it enters the battlefield, you can reveal an island or mountain card from your hand if you don't enter the battlefield tapped, and it can tap for a blue or red. Now, I actually believe that that deck is entirely basics at this point, but adding this one in couldn't hurt. If all the other lands are basics, well, then this one is pretty much always going to enter the battlefield untapped early on in the game. Or essentially whenever. Nylia draws a lot of cards. But next up, let's move on to a somewhat similar yet different kind of deck with Nylia Keen-Eyed. Nylia is actually my newest personal deck, and I showed it off on a recent episode. Now, a lot of Nylia decks might be built around a lot of big creatures, but mine was built around, well, let's just say specific kinds of creatures. She has creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So because of that, I just packed the entire deck with, well, creatures that cost 1 generic mana or less. So yes, even in mono green, you can technically have an artifact storm deck-esque. Although I would more so classify this one as artifact storm aggro. Rather than storming off like Nylia though, you're basically looking to flood the board with a ton of creatures and then pump those creatures and draw cards in various ways and smack your opponents with an absurd amount of tiny creatures. Well, tiny creatures that got bigger, and yeah. Now there are only so many of those creatures that meet those requirements of being 1 generic mana or less. And even if a small creature can't attack, it can still have other benefits as well just for being in play or casting it. So a creature from Strixhaven that I am considering is Excavated Wall. It's a 0/4 that costs 1 that has Defender and has pay 1 to tap to mill a card. Again, essentially for this deck's purposes, it's a 0/4 wall with Defender that you can cast for free. Now this card is already strictly better than another Defender that's in the deck, but do I really need it? I'm not sure. Regardless, at 10 cents, it doesn't hurt to try it out. But now let's move on to a completely different card, and actually one that I mentioned earlier with Strixhaven Stadium. Now whereas Rarity might just want it as a mana rock, Nylia definitely wants it as an alternative win condition. Getting 10-point counters on Strixhaven Stadium through combat is going to be incredibly easy for this kind of a deck. Again, this deck is looking to flood the board with an absurd amount of creatures, so it's going to be impossible for our opponents to block all of them. So with this, we can even just finish off our opponents without actually having to pump our creatures. And speaking of pumping creatures, let's move on to Gauntlet Primal Hunger. So just as my Nylia deck is a little off the wall and not one that you typically see, my Gauntlet deck is as well. That's because my Gauntlet deck is a vehicles deck, or as I like to call it, dinosaurs in cars. Although thinking more about it, that name doesn't entirely make sense because Gauntlet might be the only dinosaur in that deck, and you're also not looking to drive any of the cars with Gauntlet. Or at least most of the time you're not. Anyways, I'm rambling now, and the deck's premise is this. Gauntlet Primal Hunger is going to cost X less to cast for X the total power of creatures you control. Gauntlet is a 12/12 trample that costs 12 mana. But by getting undercosted vehicles out, you can crew those vehicles to crew other vehicles to get Gauntlet out in absolutely no time. Also, vehicles dodge your typical creature board wipes. Since those are typically cast at sorcery speed, your vehicles are going to be fine. So even if your opponents kill Gauntlet, you can just recast her the next turn for 2 mana again. Now the first card that I would consider from this set for Gauntlet is Witch's Clinic. It's a very simple land that you can tap it for a colorless or pay 2 and tap it and target commander gains lifelink until end of turn. So yeah, gain 12 or more life on a land is a very lovely thing. And I do say or more because another card that I'm going to be considering is Exponential Growth. It's a sorcery for XX green that says until end of turn, double target creature's power X times. So if you pay 4 mana in total, it doubles once. If you pay 6 mana in total, it's going to double twice. Basically, for 6 mana, you're turning Gauntlet into a 48/48 with trample, and yeah, that's a one-shot kill on anyone. I mean, even just technically doubling it once is going to be a one-shot kill if they don't have enough blockers. Or in another way, you could actually use this to save mana on Gauntlet. Say that you've got a creature in play that's already a 6/6. You pay 4 mana to double it into a 12/12. So that's an extra 6 power to reduce Gauntlet's cost. Technically, you saved an extra 2 mana on Gauntlet. And again, with an even bigger creature, the more mana that you save. So this card does have multiple applications, and again, the most obvious one is just smack an opponent with Gauntlet when it's a 48/48. But with all that said, this show is coming to a close. So now it's my turn to hear from you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on my potential upgrades for my decks. And of course, I'd love to hear if you've got any ideas for other upgrades that I didn't mention this episode. There are a ton of new and exciting cards from Strixhaven and the Commander Precon deck, so I'm sure a few might have slipped by. So comment below and let me know what I might have missed. And as always, thanks again and have a good one.